Welcome back, Fiber Friends, to the Wool to Gold channel. My name is Brian, I am your host, and today we're going to be making some yarn. We're always kind of making some yarn. I'm predominantly a spinner. I also crochet a little bit. I love all fiber arts, and I've actually been making some progress on my hand sewing journey finally. But we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next episode. This episode, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about blending and spinning locks. So in my last podcast episode, I showed a haul where I showed a lot of the locks that I purchased for lock spins. If you're unfamiliar with a lock spin, I'll insert a few photos of my own personal work here just to kind of give you a general idea of what I'm talking about. A lot of people often talk to me about going to shows and admiring these locks, wanting to purchase things like mohair, Wensleydale, Teeswater locks, and just being a little bit intimidated because they're not sure exactly how to use them. And even if they've seen a lock spin before, they're not really sure how it's done. So I just wanted to show you how I do my lock spins, and maybe it'll give you a jumping off point for doing your own. I also talked about in the last Wool to Gold episode that I would be talking a little bit more about color theory as we moved into the year. So I want to get a little bit more into doing color studies, and this project is definitely going to be a really good example of that. So we're going to be playing a little bit with the traditional complementary color scheme. So we're going to be working with purple and green today. My goal for this yarn is to end up with a really moody color scheme for the most part. So I don't want the greens to end up coming out too bright. However, I do want to blend in a little bit of bright green for some dimension, which I'll be showing you when we bring out the blending board. Otherwise, I also have plans to sort of incorporate almost a little bit of an analogous color scheme with a complementary. So I have these greens, but I'm also going to be working with a little bit of pink and purple, particularly and more specifically this magenta that you see in these locks. I'm hoping that by blending these colors all together, I'll get sort of a moody base where the brighter magenta locks will really pop, while these darker purple locks will play into the blended color scheme that I've made for the base yarn. Now, this is the overarching goal, right? Will this be accomplished? I'm not really sure. I'm not super experienced with studying color, and so this really is just sort of a shot in the dark, but I'm really happy I get to bring you guys on this journey along with me, and I hope we all have fun on this little color study that I do today. Alright, these are our colors all out of the bag. Let's get to the blending. Alrighty, fiber friends, so if you're not familiar, this is going to be my blending board. I do all of my blending on a blending board. I don't yet have a drum carder. My dream drum carder, if you're curious, is the Paul Britton Classic carder. I did get to test them at Rhinebeck this year, and it was just a really wonderful piece of machinery. I think if I was to get a drum carder, that would be the one. But for now, we just have this lovely blending board from Golden Fleece Carders. This is also where I got my hand carders. Occasionally, the blending board and the hand carders go on sale together, and that's when I picked mine up. I just found that to be a really opportune time. So yeah, I'll put that information below if you're interested in picking up a similar one. Again, not sponsored. I bought it with my own money. I just really like their product. Today, we're going to be approaching this blending a little bit more carefully than a lot of my other blending, especially if you've seen me blend on TikTok, because we're going to be going in purposefully kind of thinner layers. I want to actually get a nice blend on this color scheme, and we might actually blend it more than once, depending on how this first piece turns out. We're going to start with a nice teal base. Not too strong. I want to be able to see the other colors come through. Next up, we're going to bring in this purple and magenta. Now, if you're curious, the teal I don't have information on because I did get it as part of a de-stash when I purchased my Lendrum wheel. I got that fiber from that spinner, and I have no information on it. However, this beautiful color that I'm using here, as well as the green braid that you see above, are going to be from Xander's Cottage, and I'll link that information below if you're interested in seeing if they still have either of these colorways available. We're trying to do thinner layers here because I actually want to blend the color. I don't just want to end up with an art bat. I do think that this will probably end up in a Rolag format, but we'll see. We'll see what the colors call to. So far, though, I like what we're doing. I heard that when you mix green and purple, you get kind of a slate color, and that is what I'm kind of shooting for here. So I want more of like a moody, stormy color scheme, which is not normally the kind of thing I go for. I like to use color schemes to my advantage and kind of use, like, I guess now that I know the lingo, split complementary color schemes to make certain colors really pop. But today we're doing quite the opposite. We're really trying to make everything muddle together in a delicious fiber stew. I feel like here on the YouTube channel, you guys really do get a little bit more of my weird personality, so I hope you don't mind. But I definitely think of fiber the way that I think about recipes sometimes, and like cooking. Especially that no matter how many times you read a technique, you really need to do it in order to really understand it. I think that's a big similarity between cooking and spinning. If you don't know this fact about me, my background is in hospitality. Specifically, many, many years ago, I started my career in restaurants as a line cook. I was on the line for a number of years before I migrated to front of house. And there are still aspects about that portion of my life that I really missed and enjoyed. But I do think that my talents are better used off the line and out and about in the restaurant now. All right, I'm looking down here to see kind of what we have. And I think what we have is kind of what I'm aiming for. Again, I don't want that bright green to come through too much, but I do want to layer in just a little bit more depth of color on the green. And I also want to add in this Stellina / sparkle. I also find that as much as I appreciate a 4-ounce braid as much as anybody else, like there's so much potential with 4 ounces, especially if you are going to blend it and make it larger. That being said, I often find that like 4 ounces is a lot of fiber for me as someone who tends to like to blend things. So I can turn like 4 ounces into so many different projects. That's why when I touch up my fiber stash from places, I tend to buy in like 2-ounce color bumps. I just find that to be more in the range of like how I end up liking to use color. Again, I hope you guys don't mind the like random fiber chatter as we blend this together. And again, I feel like sometimes some of these layers might look thick, but I really want to emphasize to you, I have maybe 1 ounce of fiber on this board right now. So layers and layers and layers. That's what we're going for. And I really think this is going to give this yarn such a like beautiful muddiness. Like one of those yarns that like when you look at from far away, this is all definitely going to look kind of one color. But then when you look closer, it's going to look a lot different. And I think that's going to be really beautiful. Between you and I, too, it's just about time that I use this teal roving because I didn't purchase it myself. It came in, instead of being like braided up, it came in a ball. I know I could braid it up. I'm probably going to braid it up after this project. I have just been super lazy about it, so I've left it in sort of just this like this roving ball. And if you are unfamiliar, like this is the butt end of a braid, and then this green fiber is still like braided, right? Now this is not always a great way to store super fine fibers that are prone to compaction. This particular comb top merino I have found is really not prone to getting compact on me, and I end up blending it anyways, so it doesn't really matter as much. But some fibers, when they're put in that braid format, will really easily felt on you, and so that's not always the best way to store them. But this merino has just been like in a ball, just like sitting on my bottom shelf, taking up a lot of space, and I'm always careful to not like put too much pressure on it because I'm afraid it's gonna fell in the ball. But yeah, it's time that I try to use this this comb top. The thing about comb top and me is that, like, I really prefer to have it in a carded prep style, if I'm being honest, which is why today we're going to turn it into Rolags, because it's been a while since I had some of my own Rolags.
Alrighty, so for this next section of Rolags, I actually wanted to measure out some fiber so that my sections are fairly even when it comes to blending and the amount that I have in each section. So the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be doing kind of a gradient of these complementary colors in which the base is, you know, a blend of all of these colors together. But then, you know, on one side, it's going to be more heavy on these purples, and then on the other, it's going to be a lot heavier on the green. And then I'm going to chain ply the whole thing together so that I do get kind of a gradient. There will be some middle sections of Rolags that are even amounts of all of the colors together. I know this might not be how some people would do a color study, but this is how I'm interested in color. I'm interested to see how this gradient is going to look, considering it is a complementary color scheme. And this is just how my brain works. I don't know. This is how I want to explore color. So I hope you're enjoying my version of a color study. And don't forget to leave a comment about what color I should do next.
Alrighty, a little bit of a time jump here, fiber friends. So it's the next day. I finished blending the rest of the Rolags on live with you guys yesterday. These are the ones that I blended up on video for here on YouTube. And we'll be, again, reminder, spinning those up with the locks. Now, I also made some Rolags on live that are a little bit more of a gradient. So what I plan on doing is chain plying it and spinning it in sort of like a gradient format. So we have a base of this in which one end is a little bit more green and the other end is a little bit more purple. I'm really just interested in seeing how a complementary color scheme will look when it's put in that kind of situation. I'm hoping that each of those colors will sort of come through on each end, but I'm not really sure. Again, I've never really worked with complementary color schemes in this way before, or I guess this thoughtfully before, so I'm excited to see how this all turns out. Another thing that I did while I was, you know, not on film with you guys and I was just kind of wasting my time yesterday, not spinning, apparently, I was doing a little bit of mending finally. So don't make fun of my hands. Okay, you can make fun of the hand sewing because it's not great, but for me, it's a big step. So here I put a massive tear in this sweatshirt. This is my favorite sweatshirt, and I'm super duper happy that there's now, it's all sewn up. I don't have a gaping hole right by my nipple anymore, which is ideal. I also finally mended these pants, which I've been saying I'm going to mend like since I started this channel, essentially. I did use some green thread like I said I was going to. Honestly, my hand sewing here, I'm pretty proud of. This looks pretty nice. I mean, again, I'm sure there are nicer. This is my like second hand sewing project ever, so again, cut me some slack. I am still learning. And then I did kind of a darn here. I did it badly. But again, in my opinion, you can't do something really, really well until you do it a lot of times not so perfectly, you know what I mean? So if you're curious, here are some of the Rolag examples for the gradient. So again, I used a base where I blended all the colors together, but then I used my scale to actually measure out some extra portions of the purple and the green fiber in order to make, you know, each of the sides a little bit more of each of those colors. And then in the center, there is one side that's like a little bit of extra green, a little bit of extra pink, and then one that's like kind of perfectly centered for the middle gradient. And again, the hopes is once I chain ply these together, that you're going to get some kind of interesting gradient effect. I'm not really sure how dynamic it's going to end up looking in the end product, but I'm just curious. Again, this is a color study. The purpose is to play with color and to learn by doing, because as much, again, as I appreciate all of the resources that came before me, I really do think, especially in the case of spinning, just like any other art, I think you need to do it in order to really get like a firm understanding of what exactly is happening with both colors and fibers. Because, like, you can read and listen to all the spinning theory you want, which I did before I got a spinning wheel. That was a really big part of my journey. I spent years denying the fact that I was going to end up being a spinner, despite the fact that I was constantly collecting information on how to spin yarn and different types of yarn and all of these different things. All of that being said, when I sat down at a spinning wheel for the first time, I still had to learn to spin. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can only do so much by just reading about something. So I think it's important to, as much as it's easy to just kind of get all this color theory information from one or two resources, one or two books, I think it's important to actually experiment with it yourself. That's just my 2 cents. So I'm going to be spinning the gradient portion of this live, but if you clicked on this video, you're again probably here to see how I actually do lock spin. So whenever I start a lock spin, I always kind of just start with the base piece or the piece that is not locked. So I want a nice solid sort of lead on portion of yarn that is just normal run-of-the-mill yarn before we start adding the locks in. The reason I do this is because it just gives you the opportunity to really get your tension right. And again, just warm up to the spin, get a feel for everything before you start getting into the textured portion, which again, for some people can be a little bit more stressful than spinning something really consistent. So when I get to the point where I feel like it's about time that I can start adding locks, I will stop the spin and then I will wrap my yarn around whatever anchor you normally use. So on this particular spinning wheel, and I'll turn the wheel just so you can see it a little bit better. On this particular spinning wheel, as you can see, this is our orifice hook and there's a place where it rests sort of on the wheel for the Lendrum. I tend to wrap my yarn right around here, just so nothing goes anywhere while we're preparing our locks. So what do I mean by preparing locks? Get your bag of locks, or, you know, your box of locks, whatever you got. And we're just gonna start by pulling out a little handful. Now, it might not seem like a lot at first, but the thing about locks, especially if you are going to kind of semi-draft them or try to get them a similar size, is that these are going to fluff up a lot. So if you've ever tried spinning locks in the past and you had a lot of trouble because you couldn't get the fiber to spin onto itself or the locks to catch well, it's probably because you didn't fluff up your locks. So I'm going to try to find a nice example here. I think this pink one will show up very well on camera. So here we kind of just, we have this clump here, and we need to pull it apart and draft it a bit and open these locks up. Some of your locks might already be kind of fluffy or the right size for you, so you might not necessarily need to pull them apart. But again, if you take something like this, we love these locks because they're nice and lustrous, but they don't necessarily attach super well. So what you can do is kind of come to like the top of the lock and like separate it out a little bit, give it a little bit of a halo, a texture, a floof, and that will help the locks catch on to themselves a little bit better. So you can just go through and find locks. Some of them I'll just pull like apart and leave kind of like attached at the bottom so that I can get like an easier continuous draft of yarn. Some of the pieces you'll find might be bigger or smaller, might need more or less fluffing. Again, it's kind of like up to your discretion. And then when you start spinning, if there's a few locks that are giving you trouble, like you can set them to the side and then fluff them again for the next round if they are giving you some issue. And then what I do once I do have like a nice pile of nice and fluffed locks is I kind of just take them in a handful and I start spinning. Sometimes, you know, I'll pick one or two locks out to like start with or be the first ones. But I kind of just see like what catches to what, and then if I need to adjust it as I spin, I will. I don't tend to find this to be the case for Hidden Pastures just because they sell super quality fiber. But in some cases, when you do receive locks, they might be in kind of like a compacted state, which definitely requires a little bit more floofing. During the dyeing process, some felting can sometimes occur, and then on top of that, if you are kind of just jamming as much fiber as you possibly can into a very compact small space, there is the risk of felting occurring, which is just something to be aware of for less known or reliable lock providers. I hear people have this complaint about mohair pretty often, which is really sad because I've really only had like really beautiful quality mohair. I can't imagine ordering dyed mohair and ending up with like a super felted mess. That sounds very, very sad. But I've been lucky. I have never had that experience. I tend to buy, though, a lot of my fiber, again, especially if it's the first time I'm buying from a brand. I try to buy in person if the opportunity presents itself. That's not always possible, obviously. Sometimes you just have to go off of your friends' reviews and things like that. All right, so we have our floof ball. I don't want to spill it, but we've floofed up our locks. We have a nice little section here ready for a nice little section of texture. So the next step is I detach whatever fiber you're spinning, whether it be a Rolag, a roving, or whatever it is. And again, make sure your end here is nice and fluffed up because that is important in terms of getting the locks to actually stick to the spin. Now we're gonna unwrap our yarn here. So I take a handful of locks like this, and listen, some of them are gonna drop like as you're spinning. It's just kind of the risk. You're just gonna pick them back up if that happens. We're gonna draft out kind of slowly and carefully this next section. And with lock spins, don't be afraid to, yeah, see, like already I let too much twist into there and it doesn't really want to catch. Let's see if we can get it on this lock. There we go. Let's see. And again, depending on the actual length of the lock, you're probably going to need more or less twist. So the longer the lock, the less twist you're going to need. I find I tend to put the least amount of twist in mohair. Teeswater requires a slight bit more, even though the staple length is sometimes longer. I find the curls can be a bit slippery. And again, this is just my personal experience. You might have a totally different personal experience. Right now, I'm working with Lamb's Teeswater, Lamb locks, so they're a bit shorter. They're not as long as the traditional Teeswater. So I'm taking that into account and making sure that I am adding enough twist to just hold all these locks together. Again, my recommendation would be to add what feels like enough twist, and then if you're worried about it being ropey, you can take it out and kind of do a plyback test with the locks. You'd be surprised. Sometimes I think I'm spinning rope, and then I do a plyback test with the locks, and they fluff up a lot again. So just keep that in mind. And another thing about lock spinning is don't be afraid to take it slow. I think if you are an art yarn spinner already, you probably already know this, but art yarn tends to be kind of a slower process, or like take longer than a lot of like consistent commercial looking yarns. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the plying techniques required, just again, you have to go a little bit slower. And I find that when you spin locks, like it's not as simple as just drafting from roving or Rolag or from comb top. It's, again, you have this cloud of fiber that you're trying to spin from, and you have these like fluffed up strands, and sometimes you need to stop and readjust. And like sometimes, like this attachment point that I just made between these two locks, I felt like it was really thin, so I kind of just pulled it off, and I'm gonna fluff it up and attach it at a different point and see if that solves the issue, because I like all my locks to be firmly attached to one another. I don't really like them to have like kind of like a string point of attachment. That's what I sometimes call that. And when the spinning starts to get a little bit difficult, that's when you're going to grab more of your locks and kind of just add them to the cloud again. Some sections will definitely come easier than others. Like this section here is kind of coming along nicely and like pretty easily. One thing about lamb locks, even though they require a little bit more attention and twist is that they are going to be softer for one thing, and I do find that the yarn that you can get from them can be a little bit more consistent if that is something that you're striving for in your lock spin. I've been kind of messing around with ways of getting like semi-consistent, especially lock spins meeting like normal yarn. So I love to do what I'm doing right now, which is adding like patches almost of locks into the yarn, into like a quote unquote like normal yarn, I guess. A smooth yarn, that's what we'll call it. I just think it can really add some like life and interest to an otherwise like kind of dull yarn, but that's just my 2 cents. And when you get to a point where you feel like you've added enough locks onto your yarn, again, if you're doing an entire lock spin, I would say just sit down and floof all of your locks at once. If you're doing it like I am, where you're kind of doing it piece by piece, I would say fluff your locks in sections, because you might not go through all of those locks for the spin. And then in that case, you can just save them for mixing into another spin for some texture. And just like when we are attaching the locks, you do want to have this end piece not have like any twist in it essentially, and you kind of want to like floof it up just so the fiber is ready to attach to something else. Again, the like lustrous locks look beautiful when they're all like smooth and shiny and like left all aligned, but I do find that it's harder to get them to like catch on one another when they're like that. So that's why I really recommend this sort of like pre-floofing. And certain locks you'll find need more or less pre-floofing. You're gonna need to kind of like test that a little bit for yourself. I find that like Teeswater lamb locks require a lot more floofing, just because again, they tend to be really clean, really lustrous, and then on a slightly shorter end, and that just results in needing a bit more floof, needing a bit more floofing. But then things like mohair and an adult Teeswater, and even something like BFL, where the lock is maybe not traditionally left in a lock structure to spin, all of those tend to require a little bit less floofing, but they still require a little bit of care and thought before you jump into spinning them. There are probably going to be some people in the comments who are like, oh, well, I've done lock spins without like pulling them apart or fluffing at all, which like, kudos to you. I do think that is totally accomplishable, especially with undyed fiber. I just find when fiber gets dyed, it has a tendency again to like compact itself, even if there is no real compaction or felting. And as a result, I just think that like a lot of the times the fiber just needs to be pre-drafted or pre-prepared in some way, shape, or form. I do have an old spin. It's essentially my first lock spin before I really knew how to do lock spins, where I did not pre-floof the locks at all. And like, yes, the yarn exists and it kind of holds together, but I, like, to this day have not used that yarn because I just know that it is like a breath away from falling apart. I just don't think that it's a very sturdy or reliable yarn. And again, that's why I recommend the pre-floofing and the pre-drafting, because I just think it results in a little bit more of a strong yarn, a sound yarn, if you will. Right, so I've spun another section of our beautiful blend here. Pull that roll lag off, set it to the side. Take up, I still have a little handful of locks. I'll probably need to floof more, but I am just going to start this lock spin. And again, same thing as before. I am going to try to turn a little bit and give you guys maybe an even better angle than before. We're going to see. All right, we're drafting. We're drafting. All right, get your locks. Kind of lay the fiber over the locks. See what catches. Again, the lock spins often look chaotic because there is quite an amount of chaos to them. So keep that in mind. Like, every portion of it's gonna be tough to control every single portion of this, and that's kind of the point. Again, locks add texture and points of interest. Some of these locks are so short. Yeah, I definitely prefer spinning mohair locks because it's just, like, easier because they're nice and long. But the lamb locks are just so dang soft, y'all. Not that locks are necessarily, like, always coarse. I think it really depends on the animal that they came from. But some of them can definitely be a little bit higher in micron count. I can't remember the exact stats, but I might put average micron counts on the screen just so you guys can get kind of an idea of what I'm talking about here. And when I need to take a pause on the lock spin, I put it in place the same way as I do with the other yarn. I just wrap it around this guy right here.
And here's just a side-by-side of the locks, like unfloofed and floofed up and ready to spin. And here is a close-up of some of the yarn that we spun up here today.
Alrighty, fiber friends, we have another time jump here. I have finished spinning at least our first skein of yarn featuring the locks. So you're going to have to come back to a later episode to see the finished product on that gradient. I'll definitely give you guys follow-up information once I have that all spun up. However, I did want to show you before we left the actual finished skein of lock spun yarn. So here it is. It ended up being a 2-ply. We finished spinning it on live last night if you were able to catch it. And honestly, I could not be more pleased with the way this came out. I was not intending to keep this skein. However, I have been very tempted. So the locks just ended up looking absolutely stunning. I really think that the choice to include some of these brighter pink locks was, they just pop. It makes everything look neon. It reminds me of a poison dart frog. That's why I think I've really fallen in love with this. Sheep meets poison dart frog energy here. I'm obsessed. I love it. She is just like a neon icon, a rave icon. I love her. Maybe that's dramatic. I just didn't expect to enjoy messing around with complementary color schemes as much as I did. I know, obviously, with this spin especially, I did a little bit of a modification where I also included an adjacent, or, like, not analogous, but, like, semi-analogous color. So I included the pink, and again, the pink really stands out against that kind of slatey purple-green that we have accomplished by blending those two. However, I do think it's kind of teaching me how I like to use complementary colors, or the way I like to mess around with them. It's making me a little bit more adventurous and willing to actually spin those color schemes, because up until this point, I tend to avoid complementary color scheme, like true complementary color schemes, if I'm being honest, which is another reason that we are still going to blend up that entire gradient. But again, we're going to come back with the finished product on another video. This video was really just to teach you guys and show you guys a little bit of how I spin locks. I think I'll probably do another lock spinning video when I spin up some longer locks like the adult Teeswater or the mohair. So if you want to see that, stick around, leave me a comment below. I can make absolutely another lock spinning video. So I hope you enjoyed, fiber friends. If you don't already follow me on Instagram and TikTok, I'll put those socials below. And thank you so much for tagging along on this video. I hope you had fun.